Everyone is in the meeting.
Okay. Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining us tonight for the first installment of our Introduction to Birdwatching class. My name is Chris Murray. I am the president of DC Audubon. And we have three of our other, and soon four of our other board members and volunteers who are going to be with you tonight as well as next week. I want to just give you a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be doing tonight as well as next week, as well as run through just some kind of ground rules that will hopefully make this work really well interactively for everybody. So if you could, please make sure that you remain muted throughout the presentations. We're going to be opening up a chat box. So if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to ask your questions through the chat box, and we will get to them as we go through the presentation, as well as we're going to leave some time at the end where we will also have maybe a little bit more open-ended discussion. So we'll open up the conversation more broadly then. But feel free to ask questions through the chat box as we go along. Another thing that we're going to do throughout the presentation is to help us get to know you guys a little bit better and to also get some information from you that might be useful for this course is we're going to, through Zoom here, have a couple of polls pop up. So if you could fill those out, they'll be very, very simple questions like, you know, do you own binoculars and some other things. If you could fill those out when they come up, that would also be, would be very helpful. Also, just kind of to help you see the material better, to kind of minimize your screen to just show the speakers, and then you'll be able to see the PowerPoint that we're going to be using throughout tonight to kind of show you all the different content. Okay, Hisao, if you could forward the next slide, please. So, let me tell you a little bit about this course. So this is a class that DC Audubon has been offering for the last 2 years or so. This is, I believe, our 4th offering. And it's something that we've gotten a lot of interest in from people that we meet through a lot of the events that we do, whether they be our bird walks or tabling events or volunteer work that we do. And normally when we've done this class, we've done it in a classroom setting, which obviously we cannot do right now. And that's unfortunate, but the flip side of that is that whenever we've done it in the classroom, we've had limited space. And so we've always had more demand for this class than we've been able to provide, given the room that we have. And so kind of the nice thing about this is we can open it up to a lot more people. And so just kind of looking at how many people we've got here already with us tonight, that's many more than we've had in our previous offerings in person. So I guess that's one positive benefit of the situation that we're in right now. But what we're gonna, the goal of the course tonight and next week, if you choose to join us next week, is to introduce you to birds and birding in a way that is not only somewhat theoretical. We're going to talk about, you know, a little bit of bird anatomy and bird identification and so forth, but we're also in a very practical way. What our goal is to get you out into the field, to get you out observing birds and learning about birds and enjoying them. And I cannot think of a better time to do that than right now, because right now we are in the absolute height of spring migration. We have thousands upon thousands of birds moving through Washington, D.C. right now. This is the time of the year that me and I know the other people that you're going to be hearing from tonight, this is our favorite time of the year, I think, because there's just so much going on in terms of birds coming, birds that we usually don't see for the most part of the year. And so I'm losing a lot of sleep because I'm getting up early to get out. I know a lot of our other people in DC Audubon are doing the same. And what we want is for you to not necessarily be getting up at 4 in the morning to go out chasing birds, but to have an enjoyment and an understanding of what is going on, so that hopefully, like I think with all of us, this is something that becomes a real kind of lifelong passion of yours. So the way that we're going to do that, and I'll explain a little bit more in a second in details, we're going to basically over these next 2 weeks cover some different topics that are going to hopefully get you prepared to go out into the field, and then once you're out in there, to help you really enjoy what you're seeing and what you're finding. Next slide, please. So let me just tell you a little bit about DC Audubon. I'm not sure how many people have had any contact with us over the years, whether it be going through some of our bird walks or encountered us at some events that we've been tabling. But the Audubon Society of District of Columbia is in existence to promote the appreciation and conservation of birds and their habitats in the Washington, D.C. area. And we do this through a variety of different activities. We do a lot of education work like this class tonight. We offer classes on different topics. We are doing, in this current kind of COVID environment where we can't really take groups out into the field, we are doing a number of online seminars like this one, where we are having experts come in and talk about different topics. So keep an eye on our social media for announcements like that. But we also do, when we are able to go out and congregate as groups, we do monthly bird walks in different parts of Washington, D.C. We also do a lot of advocacy work. There are a lot of conservation issues that are really important to birds and their habitats that we spend a lot of time paying attention to, learning about, and trying to advocate for, whether it be to the local government or even the federal government, given how a lot of these issues kind of really do directly affect birds and their habitats. And another thing that I want to mention, and this is something that I did not realize really or really appreciate until I got into birding, is that urban areas are wonderful for wildlife. You might think that an urban area is kind of a wildlife desert, but that is absolutely not the case. And just to give you a sense of that, in any given year, there are in the neighborhood of about 250 species or so of birds that are identified at one point or another in the city of Washington, D.C. So there's a lot out there, and there's a lot therefore to go out and enjoy. So what I would encourage you to do, if you enjoy this class or if you're just wanting to get more involved in these issues, is to join DC Audubon. You can do it through our website, dcaudubonsociety.org. You can also become a member if you join the National Audubon Society and you are a Washington, D.C. resident. They will code you as a member of our chapter. So please do reach out to us if there's any ways that you would like to get involved or any more information. We're happy to talk more about that. Okay, next slide, please. So what we're going to do over the next 2 weeks is we're going to focus tonight on what we call Know Before You Go. So we're going to talk about a lot of things that maybe are important to think about and to get familiar with and to know about before you actually go out and actually really try to observe and count or identify birds. You can certainly do that. And when I first started birding, I went out with really no knowledge at all. I didn't know what I was doing. And I was kind of overwhelmed. All kinds of stuff was happening that I had no concept of. And I was kind of frustrated. And I wish I'd have known some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight before I actually got out there. So we're going to talk about things like, you know, why should we be interested in bird watching? What are the advantages of it? Why might we enjoy it? Why are some reasons why people do it? And then we're going to talk a little bit about some equipment that you might need or might want to have to really maximize your experience. We're going to talk about binoculars. We're going to talk about field guides. And we're going to talk about online tools and apps that you can use as well. And then we're going to talk a little bit about where to actually go out and look for birds in the DC area. Lots of different habitats and places. And then next week, if you want to join us next week, we're going to talk about out into the field. So how do you identify birds? Different parts of the birds. We'll talk about bird songs. So all of these things of when you're actually out there experiencing nature and wildlife, and all these birds are flying around and singing, and you're getting glimpses of them, some better than others. How are you actually able to figure out what it is you're seeing and hearing? And what does it mean? How do these birds fit into their environment? What do they tell us? So that's what our goal is over the next couple of weeks. What I want to do is introduce each of our presenters, and then we'll kind of launch into the content. And so as I mentioned, my name is Chris Murray. I'm the president of DC Audubon. I'm a relatively new birder. I've only been birding for, I think, about 8 years or so. And I'm one of the people that just kind of got hooked and had my entire world just kind of open up to all these different things that I was really ignorant of for most of my life. As a little bit of background, I'm originally from the Midwest. I grew up in Wisconsin. And I think one of the things we're all going to tell you, each of us, is kind of what our favorite bird is. My favorite bird is one that I don't see here in Washington, D.C. Because of where we are, the habitat, and the geography. It's the sandhill crane. It's very much a bird of the Midwest that when I go back home, I just love seeing it. It's a very, I think, beautiful, charismatic, interesting bird. So that's a little bit about me. I think I'll turn things over to Hisao. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Hisao Yatsuhashi, and I'm a trip leader volunteer with DC Audubon. And I'm originally from Massachusetts, and I'm a relatively new birder as well. When I was a kid, my father used to encourage me to watch the birds in our backyard bird feeder. But as I grew older, as I became a teenager, I lost interest. And to parallel that, about 10 years ago, I started tracking birds in our backyard feeder with my preteen daughter. And she also lost interest. But my interest blossomed, and I started going out into the field a lot more. And I'm kind of hoping that the seed that my father planted when I was young will be planted in my daughter's head as well. And when she's my age, she'll start going out on her own as well. My favorite bird is probably the Carolina wren. That's one of the birds that would often come to the bird feeder when I was watching birds with my daughter. Very feisty, loud, and bird with lots of personality.
Marissa, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, thanks. I'm Marissa Jones. I'm a DC Audubon board member and the chair of the education committee, which does field trips and classes like this. I got interested in birding maybe 10 years ago or so. After, again, like Hisao, my dad sort of planted the seed when I was young. And then after I went on a study abroad trip and was forced to learn a bunch of species, I returned home and just couldn't stop. And birds have such a great kind of community and they're everywhere. So it's been really rewarding and a great hobby. I'm glad you're all here to and interested in this class. So my favorite bird overall is the Laysan albatross, not a bird in DC. And my favorite bird that you can see in DC is the cedar waxwing.
Excellent. And finally, Dana.
Hi, I'm Dana McCoskey. I'm a board member of DC Audubon. I am on a member of the education committee and the conservation and advocacy committee. So we do a lot of education and outreach work here in DC. I got into birds when I was in college. I went on a field trip with our ornithology professor. And before that, I was working mostly with mammals, but it really sparked my interest in birds. And when I graduated, I went into the field and worked with a lot of different animals, including owls, migratory birds, which brings me to my favorite bird, which is actually the state bird of DC. And one of the reasons why I came to DC is to study this bird with the Smithsonian, the wood thrush, which you can see now in our forests and even in some city streets that have tall trees.
Okay, so if we could, I think, go to the next slide.
I think John is here too.
Oh, is John with us? Good. Yeah. John.
You can mute him if he wants to speak.
Okay, excellent.
Hey, yeah, I'm here, guys. Sorry. I actually think I might be presenting next week, the bird song piece. I wasn't sure if I was presenting material from this week, but yeah, I'm John Vucikevich. I'm also involved with DC Audubon and the education committee. I have been birding for probably more than half of my life now, which is kind of an interesting way of thinking about it. I got into it in college, studying ecology, and in upstate New York, and ended up in a variety of field technician roles, which at one point led to me being paid to count birds, to survey warblers in the Adirondack Park in upstate New York, which was probably the best job I'm ever gonna have. It was pretty great. And so a lot of that identification was based on knowing the bird songs. And so that's, for me, a big part of of birding and what I enjoy the most about it. My favorite bird is probably the Blackburnian warbler, which is a really beautiful flame orange warbler that hangs out at the top of large pine trees usually. It's kind of hard to see. There's a really delicate song, but it does come through DC in migration sometimes. So it doesn't breed there, but you can catch it.
Great. So can we go to the next slide, please? So here's where we would like to learn a little bit about each of you. We are going to have a couple of polls. I see the first one has popped up right now. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself in terms of where you're from. Have you ever been bird watching before? Have you ever been on one of our field trips? And also, if you would like to, through the chat box, tell us a little bit about what your favorite bird is. We're interested in kind of what you like, and maybe we can help you find it in the area especially, or provide some tips on it. So please do fill this out as we get started here. So I'm going to turn things next over to Dana, who's going to talk a little bit about why this is such a wonderful activity and hobby to be involved in.
Thanks, Chris. So you may be asking yourself why birds and birding, but it does look like from the first glance of the poll that lots of people have been birding before. Birds are really everywhere. We find them on all the continents. They inhabit every type of habitat imaginable, land, air, sea. There are many adaptations. There are more than 10,000 species worldwide. And according to eBird, over 300 birds have been seen here in DC. So that's residents, migratory birds, and rare birds that show up here. There's an incredible diversity of size, shape, behavior, color. So they're really fun to watch. They're really great critters to just keep your eye on. And so we're hoping that we can provide some of the skills to start figuring out what these birds are. There are amazing natural phenomena that you can experience or pursue, like spring migration that's going on right now, where thousands of birds are flying from South America, Central America, Mexico, different parts of the US, and passing through DC and the surrounding area. It's a great community to be involved in. There's lots of online community, there's lots of groups, there's people to go into the field with and explore with. And one of my favorite facts about birds is they're living dinosaurs. So you can't get much more interesting than that. Next slide. So why do birds matter? For me, it really goes back to the fact that birds are ecological indicators. So we know that if we take care of birds, we're taking care of everything else in our environment. And they tell us if our environment is doing well or not. We've maybe heard the phrase canary in a coal mine. We can think of our birds like that. They really tell us when something is wrong. They provide valuable ecological services, pollination of plants, dispersing seeds. There are scavenger birds that move nutrients around in the environment. They really help us connect with our environment. One of the reasons I like bird watching so much is when I go places and I meet people that are birders and I see birds and I find that community, it really helps me get a better, deeper understanding of what's going on. They add beauty and joy to the world, and they've been a source of art and inspiration through the ages. I mean, we can look at ancient civilizations. They depicted birds. We can look at murals in DC. People are still celebrating birds. Next slide. So do birds look the same throughout the year and as they get older? The answer is no. There are a lot of different changes that birds go through, whether it's changing their plumage, their feathers, either to assist with migration, just because their feathers are made out of keratin and they get worn out, just like our nails. So they may need to replenish their feathers for flight. For mating and reproduction, a lot of male birds get showy plumage. And so first-year birds versus second-year birds may look different. We have this cute little fluff ball picture here. Also, small birds that are just hatched have a lot of down. So you're going to see a lot of changes if you're in the field. So it's something to be aware of for the practical skill of birding. One picture I really like on this slide is this robin in the bottom right-hand corner. There's a lot of fledgling robins right now. And you can see the bird on the left that has more spots is actually a juvenile robin. Even though it's the same size as the adult, it's probably only a few weeks old. And the adult is on the right with the black back and much brighter yellow bill and the red belly. Next slide. Okay, so how do we know what birds are where? Well, one way you can do that is to look at the range map. And each bird has a different range. And what we're trying to show you here is just a primer to what we'll talk about a little bit more when we look at field guides. But you can see from these maps, there's two different types of birds on this slide. On the left, there's a black-polled warbler, and the male is on the top and the female is on the bottom. So they look really different. They have different plumage. And there's a white-throated sparrow on the right. So what these maps are showing, the orange area is where they breed. It's their summer range. The yellow area is where they migrate through, so where you're going to see them in the spring and fall. And the blue area is where they go to their overwintering grounds, we call it, their winter habitat. And there's a little teeny tiny speck of purple on the white-throated sparrow's range, and that's where it lives all year round. Next slide. Now there are other types of birds like our robins and the Carolina chickadee that you're probably going to see in DC year round. Now robins have some short distance migrations, not all of the population, but some individuals. But here this purple color of their range map shows that they're here year round. Whereas Carolina chickadees are truly resident birds. So this is something to think about as you're trying to figure out what time of year it is and what you might expect to see. Next slide. So why should you go bird watching? I think a lot of people want to do it so they can enjoy and appreciate nature. It's a really great thing that you can do anywhere. I bird watch at my house every day. You know, it's urban and I see different types of birds here than when I go into parks and things like that. But it's a great hobby and it's fun. There's really a lifetime of learning that you can provide for yourself. It marks the seasons. You do have to get up early. And I think that may discourage some people, but it is true the early birder gets the best bird list. And there's lots of ways to be a birder, to keep challenging yourself and learning, whether it's through learning how to visually ID birds, so looking at pictures and images and birds in the field, whether it's learning their songs, understanding which behaviors are characteristic of certain birds, being a scientist, being a citizen scientist, being a trip leader, a group member, a photographer. There's all kinds of different ways that people get into birds and sharing about their experiences with them. I, of course, like to add birds to my life list so I can compete with one of my friends about who's seen the most. So there's all kinds of fun things you can do. And we have this image at the bottom with different people's names on it and the bar chart. These are actually the best birders of DC. So we're going to learn a little bit more about some of the apps that you can use to keep track of your birds, like eBird. But all over the world, you can look up information about who the top birders are. So it's a fun, slightly competitive hobby. Next slide. Because of COVID-19, we had to say something about this. There's been a lot of interest in birding, like whether it's from your porch or in your backyard, attracting birds to your property, and going out in the field and experiencing nature. We really recommend that you're aware of your environment at all times, but be very respectful and conscientious to people. You know, check to see if the trails and the parks and natural areas are closed, and make sure that you're respecting people's distance. We really encourage you to, follow CDC guidelines and, like I said, just be aware and respect people. Next slide. So where can you go birding in DC? This is a picture of DC with just a couple of birding spots. There's way more. But it's on our website from the DC Audubon Society, and it gives you a little bit of information. We have really a great city here with so many different types of landforms and habitats. There's about 240 birds that we consider the core DC birds, even though we get more than that here. So where to go, it really depends on what the season is, what you want to see, what type of birding you want to do, what type of habitat you want to experience, and then some practical things like accessibility, access, and there's a lot of information on the DC Audubon website, and we can talk a little bit more about that too in the chat later. Next slide. So like I said, just birding at your house is a great thing to do, even if you live in an urban environment. Neighborhood parks are great. I live by LaDroit Park. I see totally different birds just like 4 blocks away than I see at my house because they have some taller trees and some different landscape features there. The National Mall has been said to be one of the best national parks to go birding in. I have found rare birds there. There's a lot of different water features, and by the river is great too. Fletcher's Cove by the Potomac, Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens. The list just goes on. Rock Creek Park is a favorite right now because of all the forest. So there's actually really some really great areas. So we're very, very lucky here in DC to be able to go to all these places and to see so many different things. Next slide. And I think I'm going to turn it back over to Chris.
Okay, excellent. So if we could go to the next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about first here, binoculars. So probably more than anything else, your primary tool out in the field. I'm amazed when I kind of read what kind of histories of birding or old accounts of birding before binoculars existed, that people were actually able to identify things just with the naked eye. I don't know how they did it. Or even with, even we got to the point where using opera glasses. I don't know if I could have been a birder back in those days with such primitive equipment. But fortunately, we are in an age where we have wonderful optics to help us kind of see what is out there. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of how binoculars are built, because understanding kind of the structure of these tools will help you choose which is probably going to be the best one for you. And I also want to talk a little bit about how to use them. When you're out in the field, what are the best ways to kind of maximize your usage of these so that you are able to actually see what it is you think you see. If we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so there are a bunch of different factors that you need to consider when you are thinking about buying a pair of binoculars. And everybody's going to be a little bit different in how they weigh these things and value these things. And I'm going to talk about all of them. Obviously, price is going to be a consideration. Binoculars range in price from a little over $100 to you can spend $3,000 on a pair of binoculars. So obviously you want to buy something that is affordable, that you're comfortable spending that money on, and especially maybe as a beginning birder, you want to maybe start a little bit more modestly, and then if you realize that this is actually something that you're going to spend a lot of time doing, and you want to invest more into it, then maybe work your way up to something of a little bit higher caliber. Another thing is weight. You're going to be carrying these things around with you in the field, sometimes maybe for a couple of hours. You want to think about, what it's going to be like physically to have these things around your neck, carrying it around through the woods. I'm going to talk a lot about magnification and what is called field of view. So what do you actually see when you look through the lenses there? And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the kind of the major brands, and also maybe where, if you're thinking about going out and getting a pair of binoculars, where to go out and try some out, because you definitely want to compare different models at the same time, ideally, so that you can see literally side by side the differences in different models. Okay, next slide, please. So let's start with probably the primary aspect of a binocular that somebody thinks about when they pick one up and start to look through it. And that's what's called magnification. How much is that image that you are looking at being magnified to your eye. And magnification, when you look at a pair of binoculars or you see one advertised, you're going to see that there are two numbers that are presented in the description of the binoculars. So the example we've got here on the slide are what are called 8x42s. Magnification is that first number, in this case 8. So the 8 times the image is being magnified by the lenses. Now, in all of these different aspects of a binocular that I'm going to talk about over the next few minutes, there are a variety of trade-offs or factors that you need to think about to kind of choose a model that's going to be best for you. And magnification is a great example of this, because you might think that the more magnification you have with your binoculars, the better. You're able to see things further away, those things appear much larger, therefore they're easier to identify. All great, right? Not necessarily. Because given how binoculars work, the way in which these lenses get the image to your eye, as you get more magnification and you're zooming in further and further on that image, what is actually happening is it can sometimes get harder to actually have a stable image with more magnification, because what you tend not to realize when you use binoculars is that you always have a degree of shaking in your hands. And the more magnification you have, that shaking gets exacerbated more and more and more. And so it's hard to keep that image stable in your eye, making it harder to actually keep focus and identify it. The other problem with a lot of magnification, and this is especially true, let's say you're out birding in the woods and you're looking in trees and there are a lot of leaves and branches and tangles. More magnification makes it oftentimes harder to figure out where you are and where you're looking, because you're so far zoomed in that you actually lose perspective. So oftentimes less magnification is better than more magnification. So when you're starting to look at binoculars, you'll see 8 times magnification, sometimes 10 times. You'll even see, and I don't really know any birders who use magnification more than 10, but you'll see advertised 12 times or 20 times. A lot of people use binoculars for astronomy. I think that's where that higher magnification might be useful, but I can't imagine going out birding with anything more than 10 times magnification. I use 8x42s, and I think that tends to be probably the most common. It's a nice balance between a lot of magnification, but also this other aspect that happens when you look through your binoculars is what's called the field of view. What is the range of space that you are actually able to see? With more magnification, that field of view gets smaller. And again, as I mentioned a second ago, you tend to lose perspective. So imagine looking up into a dense tree with a lot of leaves trying to find a tiny warbler right now in migration, and you're so far zoomed in, you suddenly, you don't know what you're looking at. So having a little bit less magnification might actually be useful. Okay, next slide, please. So I mentioned field of view. What do you actually see? What is the kind of the left to right, the distance in front of you that you're able to see? That is what's called the field of view. And when you're looking at a pair of binoculars, if you're looking at an advertisement for one, oftentimes the field of view is represented as a degree. So of a 360-degree circle, imagine how much of that space is actually viewed through your binocular. Another way that it's oftentimes reflected, and I'm just looking at a pair, this is a pair that I just bought recently for us to use on our field trips. They oftentimes refer to the field of view in a number of feet at 1,000 yards away. So this pair of binoculars, the field of view is 393 feet at 1,000 yards, which basically means if you're looking at 1,000 yards into the distance, you're going to see 393 feet from left to right through your lenses. And so, you know, field of view is going to be really important. And again, it is oftentimes going to be dependent maybe on the type of habitat you're in. Again, if I'm in a densely crowded habitat with a lot of leaves and a lot of trees, I like to have a lot of field of view so that I can kind of see a lot of space, especially if I'm looking for something small. Maybe if I'm, say, out on the ocean, I'm on a pelagic trip, and there aren't any trees, and it's basically very open, but what I'm looking at is really, really far away. Maybe having a lot more magnification there is better, especially if it's easier to actually find the object where not having as much field of view is maybe necessary. So again, there are some trade-offs here, and as you start picking up different binoculars and experimenting with them, you'll get a sense of kind of what we mean by these things. The other part of a binocular in terms of its construction is what is called the objective diameter. And what that is, that's that 42 in the 8x42. What that refers to is the diameter of what are called the objective lenses. So these are the lenses that you don't put your eyes up against. So in this case, the 42 means 42 millimeters is the size of these lenses. And basically what the objective lens does is it brings light to your eye. The larger your lenses, the more light that is being brought in. And like I said, with magnification, you might think the more light, the better, because that makes the image brighter. It makes it easier to see, especially if you're out birding in, say, at dawn or at dusk where light conditions aren't the best. You want to take advantage of all the light that you can. However, the trade-off is the more light you bring in by having bigger and bigger lenses, that means that suddenly these lenses get heavier and heavier and heavier. Now we start to think about weight becoming a factor. And when I said earlier about your hands shaking, when we talked about magnification, the same thing is true when it comes to your objective lenses. The bigger they get, the heavier they get, the harder they are to keep stable, and especially if you're carrying them around for a couple hours a day, big lenses aren't always what you might think they're cracked up to be. So you can see on the slide here just kind of different aspects of this, looking at the same bird, what different types of degrees of light and magnification can sometimes provide you. So what I've got here, these are my trusty binoculars. These are 8x42s. I found them to be a really good trade-off in terms of magnification and lens size. But you can get smaller ones. This is a pair that I have that I kind of keep in my car in case I'm out driving and I hear that there's a crazy bird out that I need to go chase. These are a little bit smaller. These are 8x30s. So you can see that the lenses are a bit smaller. The magnification is the same, but I'm going to get a little bit less light through these, and also probably a smaller field of view also. So a lot of different trade-offs here. Okay, next slide, please. Some other things about kind of the way your binoculars are going to be built that you're going to be experiencing and thinking about. The first is called eye relief. What the eye relief is basically the distance between your eye and the lenses of your binoculars. And your binoculars are built in a way to allow you to get the proper distance between your eye and the actual binoculars. And what you'll notice on any pair of binoculars is that they have what are called eye cups that can screw out or that will screw in. And whether or not you wear glasses will determine whether or not you will unscrew them or screw them in. So I wear glasses all the time, and so the distance between my eye and the lenses of my glasses already creates some space there. And so when I wear my binoculars, or if you're a glasses wearer like myself, you will keep your eye cups screwed in. If you do not wear glasses, you'll unscrew the eye cups, and that creates a little bit more distance there between your eye and the lenses of the binoculars, the correct one, to allow you to optimally view what it is you're looking at. Next, we've got what's called the interpupillary distance. Everybody's head is shaped a little bit differently. Our eyes are spaced differently. Some of us have really big heads, some of us have small heads, and binoculars are constructed to allow us to adapt this tool to the particular shape of our head. And their interpupillary distance is a great example of that, in that it allows us to expand or shrink the distance between these lenses here to conform with the proper size of our face. And so you want to adjust the hinges to properly align with the particular distance between your two pupils. And so how do you know whether you've got the right interpupillary distance? You know when you actually look through, and as you see on the bottom of the slide here, what you want to see when you look through your binoculars is one big circle. That's when you know you've got them spaced correctly. You don't want to have what you see on the left there, which are kind of two overlapping circles. You haven't properly adjusted them to the size of your face. And so, you know, when you're looking through your binoculars, and especially when you're buying them, you know, you'll find that some binoculars, different brands, maybe spread out wider than others. Some get more narrow than others. And, you know, I'll just use the example of when my wife was picking out a pair of binoculars, the thing that was most important to her was that a lot of them didn't get narrow enough to give her the correct pupillary distance. And the pair she picked was the only one that she could find that was actually able to get this correct. So this is why, again, you really want to try these out before you buy them. And then the final part is what is called a diopter. Oftentimes, our left eye and our right eye are not equally strong. And the diopter allows us to calibrate the binoculars so that we're seeing equally through our left and our right eye, and the lenses are adjusted to that. And it's kind of difficult to explain how this works through Zoom here, but there is a ring that is on usually the right barrel of your binoculars that when you buy a pair in your manual, it will tell you how to adjust the diopter. You basically cover one eye, focus, then cover the other eye and refocus. And then with the diopter, we'll get them perfectly calibrated. So that's also something as you're kind of getting yourself situated with your binoculars, all these things are going to kind of conform to your particular physiology, essentially. And then obviously in the middle, usually in the middle, you have what's called your focus frame. This is what allows you to get the image into focus depending upon your distance. Okay, next slide, please. So I mentioned before weight. You're going to be carrying these things around with you in the field, and you want to be thinking about how comfortable is this going to be when you're out there. You might have 2, 3, 4, 5 different, say, binoculars, different brands. They're all 8x42, you know, basic, same general construction. But find as you're testing them that some of them are more heavier or lighter than others, and that might be something that's really important for you. So be thinking about that, and also, you know, if you can test it, don't just look at the binoculars, but ask if you can actually take the strap and maybe walk around with it and just see how comfortable it is to have this thing around your neck. There are some different types of straps that you can get to maybe make the carrying of binoculars a little bit easier. Most binoculars, when you buy them out of the box, will have a kind of a padded strap with them. These are pretty good. You know, you just put it around your neck and it gives a little bit of cushion, kind of, especially as you're walking on bumpy surfaces, kind of, you know, reduces the stress and the bump, bouncing around of them. So those are great. But what you can also get is what's called a harness. And hopefully you can see this as I kind of try to untangle this here, is what this is it allows you to basically distribute the weight of the binoculars, not so much just around your neck, but around your shoulders and your back. So you actually put it on like this, and now the weight is now being carried down my shoulders and down my back as well. And it makes it much, much easier to carry these things around when it's not literally pulling down on my neck. And you can pick these up, you can buy them online. You can buy them at, optics stores, for $12, $15. It's a really, really good investment to get some straps like that, harness. So, play around and experiment with different feels. Also, they sometimes feel differently in your hand. What is the kind of construction? Is it hard rubber? Is it metal? Do they have kind of indentations for your fingers or for your thumbs? A lot of different, sometimes where the focus wheel is situated is easier or more difficult to use. This pair that I showed you earlier, the smaller pair of mine, has the focus wheel all the way up in the front here. It's not the easiest to use. I probably wouldn't have it be my first choice if I were designing them, but that's kind of how these ones are set up. So you've got all these different kind of features, and just in terms of how these things are constructed that you're going to want to think about. Next slide, please. So when you're now starting to use them and get familiar with them, and especially when you start going out into the field, some tips to how to maybe maximize your use of these. If we were all going out on a field trip and going out into the field, one of the first things we would talk about, even before we go into the woods or into the wetlands and start looking at things, is a wonderful beginning tip to using binoculars when you're out in the field. And that is, when you see something, keep your eye on that, whether it's a bird or whatever else you're looking at, and then bring your binoculars up to your eyes, rather than tip your head down, pick your binoculars, and then go up and try to find it, because you're gonna lose it in that couple of seconds of tipping your head down, putting your binoculars on, and then raising them. And again, with this magnification, it's very easy to kind of get discombobulated if you're not kind of keeping your eyes constant on what it is you're looking at. So that's a kind of my beginning birding tip with binoculars. Keep your eyes on the object, bring your binoculars up to your eyes. A lot easier. Kind of keep your elbows underneath. It helps deal with the weight and provide a little bit of stability. If you can, if you're, say, in your car or up against a fence, kind of, lean against something solid, even a tree trunk, stabilize your body as much as you can to minimize any shaking that's going to make it harder to view your object. Don't be afraid of birds sitting down, especially, let's say you're on the beach or, in a habitat where a lot of birds they're not necessarily moving around a lot, or you don't have to follow them or chase them. Birding sitting down is a great way to do that also. Practice, 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 practice. The more you get familiar and comfortable with your binoculars, the better you're going to be at using them. And also, obviously, be careful with the lenses. Don't clean them with your shirt or with a towel. When you buy a pair of binoculars, they will probably come with a microfiber or other non-abrasive type of cloth. Use that, especially if you're investing a lot of money in binoculars. You don't want to scratch the lenses and end up having to buy a new pair. So be careful with them. And also, usually your binoculars will come with lens covers. Always keep those on when you're not using them. Prevent the lenses from getting scratched. Another good piece of advice. Next slide, please.
And actually, before we move on to field guides, we have a poll about binoculars. So we can find out do you own them? Are they working for you?
Yeah, and while we're putting that poll up, the final thing I'll say is, I get asked a lot of times, we get asked when we're on doing field trips, recommendations or different brands. As I said at the beginning, you can spend a lot of money on binoculars, but you don't need to spend a lot of money. The binoculars that we use for DC Audubon, we have a bunch that we keep, that we give to people on our field trips. These are them right here. They're by Vortex. This is their current 8x42 model called the Crossfire. These are about 180 bucks. These are really good binoculars. I was just outside with them today. Really good starter pair of binoculars. Again, if you're getting started, you don't need to spend $1,000 on a pair of binoculars. But you can. I think you will see an improvement in the quality as you go up the price range generally. Although I think the higher you get, the degree of difference gets smaller and smaller and smaller. I think there's probably a bigger difference between a $200 and a $500 pair of binoculars than there is between $1,000 and a $2,000 pair of binoculars. I think that the return on investment probably gets a little bit smaller as you get higher up the price range. But you got a variety of different brands out
there. To share the model of the Vortex.
Yes. When I finish, I'll put that in there. Yeah.
Great. And
so you've got Vortex, you've got Celestron, you've got Nikon. Those are kind of a lot of your kind of mid-range in terms of price. Then you've got higher price, maybe higher quality ones like Zeiss, Leica, Swarovski. It's hard for me to say what the best pair of binoculars is because I don't know how your eyes work. I don't know how you're necessarily going to use them. One thing I will say, and one of the things I'll put a plug in for Vortex, why we like them, is they probably have the best warranty that there is out there. I always use the story, my first pair of birding binoculars, I was getting ready to go out into the field. I was at my parked car. I was getting out. I was getting my bag ready and my field guide ready, and I was finishing up my coffee, and I had my binoculars on the roof of my car, and I closed the door, the binoculars fell off, and the lenses broke. And I was a half an hour away from home. I was pissed off. I wasn't going to get to go birding. And oh, by the way, I didn't have a good warranty on them. They were lost. They were done. You might want to think about, how good is the warranty of the binoculars? And I'll just say Vortex, they've got the best warranty. They've got a no-fault, 100% guarantee. You could take your Vortex binoculars, buy them, take them out of the box, put them under your rear wheel, drive over them, and they'll replace them. So that might be one thing to think of in terms of, if I give recommendations. I really like Vortex because they've got a great warranty. And they've got a range of, again, these kind of their entry-level ones, and they've got about a $1,500 pair. So I think they've got about 4 or 5 models. So experiment, practice, get comfortable with them. And you may find that as you go on over years, hopefully, you progress through different types of binoculars, and then ultimately you find the pair that are just the perfect one. So that's going to be kind of your primary tool out in the field are your binoculars. Okay, so I'm going to turn things now over to Marissa to talk about field guides.
All right, thanks, Chris. So before we get started, we're going to hold up and demo a couple of guides just briefly. And if you realize you want to see the speaker's video bigger than the slides, there's like a toggle button up in the top, swap shared screen with video. So you can do that if you'd like. But yeah, for field guides, so binoculars are the first tool of the bird watcher. Field guides are definitely the second. And I'm going to start by talking about some paper field guides. Originally, the ornithologist's primary tool was not a field guide and binoculars, but a shotgun. They would go out and collect specimens by actually killing the birds and then go back to the laboratory and identify them in their hands up close with massive reference books if needed. But as technology made binoculars more readily available and people's interests shifted and values shifted toward less extractive like hunting and collecting and more wildlife appreciation, there was an interest in field guides, and the first sort of illustrated one that you could actually take with you was published in the 1930s. It's called the Peterson Guide. And now there are a ton of different varieties. So we're going to go over some of the main features you might want to look for, and also a little bit of recommendations as well. So one of the main features you want to keep in mind is size. If you are actually carrying this with you out into the field, you might want to carry something that's not too heavy. This is National Geographic. It's one of the kind of standard ones. You can see it covers birds in North America. And it's relatively compact and not all that heavy. Some other books I have, this is not necessarily a field guide, but a really helpful reference book called The Birder's Handbook, and it is much thicker. This is not the kind of thing you want to be carrying around with you to be pulling out and using to ID birds in the field. Another aspect to consider is the geographic area covered. So for instance, here's an example of the Sierra birds. It's really slim, it's really small, and it's quite light, but it's not very much use for me here in DC. To be in the mountains of California to really get any use out of this one at all. Some field guides have illustrations. So National Geographic, Sibley, Peterson, Kaufman, these are some of the main ones. And I believe they're all photos, or they're all illustrations. Illustrations allow the person who is making the guide to orient the birds in a way that is helpful. Oh, thanks. Chris has got some up on the screens there that show some illustrations. And to call out the features, you aren't limited by light conditions in a particular photograph or the orientation of the bird. Instead, you can call out and orient the birds just so. This is actually one of the features that Audubon himself was credited for in his bird art, sort of positioning the birds to show them both artfully and also so that you could see the features that help you identify them. But photographs can be really helpful too. So you can see the birds as they appear in different lighting conditions at different angles. And there are some really interesting field guides out there that, like the Crossley guide is one, for example, that I think Chris is going to pull up, that shows kind of a photo collage of raptors in different orientations. So you can really get a sense of all the different aspects of a bird as they show in natural lighting. It's really up to personal preference here, although I think the more standard ones are these ones like National Geographic, Sibley, where you've got illustrations of birds, and then kind of call out so people can see the important identifying features there. It is very important to pay attention to the organization of your field guide. Again, the standard ones like National Geographic, Sibley, Kaufman, etc., will organize the birds according to bird family. This is the evolutionary relationships between groups of birds. And while it might be slightly more complicated, it might seem more complicated at first, it really does convey a lot of useful information. So seeing all the sparrows together, you get to see, you learn a bit about the birds. It's kind of the most robust and logical way of organizing birds, is kind of according to which ones have shared characteristics and have that shared evolutionary background. Some bird guides, like the Audubon guide and also this little Sierra bird one that I have here, will organize birds by color. And Chris is shaking his head, yeah. So this is, again, it seems tempting at first for beginning birders, and they may in fact have their place. But in general, yeah, so Chris has got the Audubon one up. I've got this other one here. And you can look up red birds, brown birds, green birds, blue birds. And that can be really helpful in some cases. But in general, as Dana was saying at the beginning, birds' plumages change so much. So something like this might take a male house sparrow and have it show up in a completely different section of the book than a female house sparrow. Males are more red, females are more gray, and it just gets really messy. And I think ultimately they're more confusing than they are helpful. So yeah, be wary of organization, and we don't tend to endorse the ones that organize by things other than taxonomy. It just doesn't help out quite so much. Some features you should look for in your books include range maps. I'm going to show some here. Some National Geographic one here has a key on the inside cover. This is the, again, like Dana showed in the very beginning, showing where the birds are found in different times of year. They also usually show up near the birds themselves. So here we've got species and then paired with the range map. So you can see right away if you're looking up a bird and think it might be one you see, whether it's actually found near you. That is like step one. So they're really, really helpful. Some have sonograms, which we can talk about. We'll talk about a little bit more in part 2, which is a visual representation of the song of the bird. They might take a little bit of adjusting in order to be able to read them, but they're really helpful. You can see at a glance whether a call is a whistle or a trill or a harmonic call. Again, more on that in part 2. And then again, most useful field guides will have brief descriptions of the birds as well. So let me pull up another example that you might see. For instance, this is a really useful book if you're traveling abroad. But it has descriptions of the birds located separately. And then it has all of the images of the birds in the center panel of the book in what are called plates. They're organized taxonomically, but it's really, really, really compact. So this is for Birding Guide of Costa Rica, which has, I don't remember the exact number, but like well over 1,000 species of birds, if I'm remembering that correctly, in just a tiny country. But as opposed to like all of North America here, where we have about, what, 900 birds-ish. And, you know, they're not that different in size. So the plate format allows you to pack a lot more birds in, but it's also, you have to like jump around in order to find the description in the range map. Finally, we've got some demos on specialty guides. You can pull up things like a guide that's all focused on helping you identify warblers, which are a very diverse group of birds. It can be tricky to tell from one another. Hisao and Chris are showing some on their videos right now. So like laminated foldouts can be really lightweight, but of course they don't include as much information. And then we've got entire guides that focus on just one family of birds, like warblers, raptors, waterfowl, and things like that. Another really important point about field guides is that you should not plan to just use them in the field. It's definitely a tool that you should plan to flip through and learn to read the introduction, see what the creators of the field guides say about its organization and how they think it should be used. So do not just use it in the field. You'll probably get overwhelmed. I certainly have been myself when I'm trying to figure out, seeing a bird, getting only a brief glance, then trying to find where the bird is in the thing, then trying to get a second look at the bird to see what features I might have missed. And it really does help if you just kind of have a broad sense of how your book is organized, how to use the index. Oh, another thing that I'll mention on that line is that a lot of these sort of main field guides, this is how National Geographic does it. On the inside front and back cover, they have families of birds, and then they list the page number so you can pull it up really quickly. And they also have a quick list here. Sibley, which is another of the kind of primary field guides that we recommend for people who are interested in birding, has a similar feature where on the second from the inside cover, they have, you can look up an index of bird families and where to find them. Next slide, please. All right, so these, again, this is for reference if you want to see. These are kind of the main ones. People have different preferences. I myself really like the Sibley Guide to Birds. It has, this is just for the Western region, so or West Coast. So again, not super helpful here in DC, but there's a line separating different species on the same page. And I find that less confusing than, say, National Geographic, where you have a bunch of different plumages all mixed together on one page. It is more compact though. So this is just the Western US or Western North America. And this is all of North America. So yeah, we hope this will help people choose recommendations. And again, once we're in person, we have like in the classroom version of this course, we bring in all these guides and let people look through them. So if at some point, we can meet up in person again, we'd be happy to let you take a look and so you can get a sense of which organizations and weights you like best. Great, we can go to the next slide, which I think is also handing things over to Pisau.
Thanks, Marissa. Okay, I will be talking about how technology has affected how we access guides and general information on birds. There is nothing like flipping through the pages of a book, but these electronic guides offer their own advantages. First of all, instead of lugging something around as heavy as a book, you get to carry it in your phone. Since they live there, it's just a lot more easier to access that information. Plus, while the illustrations and photos are things that are nice in books, they're also available in the apps, but there are other things that go beyond, say, the visual sonograms that Marissa had referenced in the books to actual bird songs that you can pull up on the app and play and listen to in the field and compare what you're hearing in real life to what you think it might be on the phone. Also, in the same way that field guides can be specific to a certain area, you can fine-tune your app so that it's specific to the where you are at the particular time. So it will call up birds that are just to be expected in your area. We're going to take a look at the quickly take a look at three of these guides. In the previous slide, we have the Sibley, Audubon, and iBird. They all have their advantages and disadvantages. The first one is the Sibley guide. It has all the illustrations, or many of the illustrations that are found in the book form. Here you have a nice house finch, male versus a female. A nice feature about the Sibley app is that it allows you to pull up similar species. So by clicking on this little item down here, it'll bring up a panel of different birds that might look similar to your target bird. If you click on the purple finch here, which is often confused for a house finch, you can pull up these side by side or one on top of the other and just compare how the plumages differ a little bit, how the shape of the beak is a little different. Scroll through and just compare the male, the female, how the bird looks in flight, etc. What's also nice about the Sibley Guide is it offers the notes on the field marks that are typically found on the bird. If you move on to the Audubon Birds app, this is the official Audubon branded bird guide and is available for free. The Sibley Guide, other guides, they can cost $20 up to $40 depending on whether you're able to catch a sale or not. This one is a nice one that's available for all at no cost. And despite the legacy of John J. Audubon's beautiful illustrations, in this app, there are no drawings, only photographs. But they are beautiful photographs, such as these wood ducks here. It provides better descriptions of the birds than the Sibley app, but on the photographs, you don't get the advantage of the field marks being pointed out or annotated. There is also a good selection of audio recordings like the Sibley app as well. The species range maps are nice and clear on this app. So they're, even though you're looking at them on the phone, they're quite legible and they have additional information. And it also helps you find the birds that are around you. So if you pull up the wood duck on your app, you'll be able to scroll to an area that shows the hot spots where you are in the Washington, D.C. area in this case, using another app that we're going to go over really quickly, the eBird app. iBird is another app that has a nice combination of illustrations here with the field marks. Here's a blow up of a goldfinch, but this is one of the better illustrations in this app. They can be kind of touch and go. Some of the illustrations they're all done by different artists, so some may be better than others, but they have a nice collection of photographs, and they really shine in the audio selection of bird calls. So here you can pull up the song of the American goldfinch and play it. Hope you can hear this. It compares it to a type of sonogram at the top. And what I like about this app is it also provides similar sounding birds, so you can compare whether what you're hearing is a goldfinch or a different type of finch. The ones that we're going to focus on a little bit more are the Merlin Bird ID and the eBird apps. These are this is what we're recommending for beginner birders, bird watchers. They're both available for free via the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. The Merlin Bird app is a great active identification app for the beginner bird watcher. It can help you ID species using a set of questions. It can also help with the identification. If you have a photograph of a bird that you want to upload, it can help with that. eBird on the right, it's a citizen science program created by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and National Audubon back in 2002. At its basic level, it's a great way for you to keep track of your personal sightings. I'm sure we've all kept lists of the birds that we've seen on scraps of paper, index cards, maybe a bound journal if you're really good, but maybe it's hard to collect all that information into one cohesive place. These apps can enhance those lists or replace those lists and help you recall what you've seen in the past, keep track of your life list, etc. And on a scientific and research level, you are contributing by submitting your observations to eBird. You're contributing to a database that can be made available to researchers and scientists to help study trends in bird populations and migrations throughout the world. What's also great about this data is that it's made available for the general public. So not only is it helping the scientific field, it's giving you clues by this crowdsourced information on where to go and see birds in your area. We're going to do, let's do demonstration of the Merlin Bird app, and hopefully I'm going to drag across an image of my phone here. Can everyone see that there? This part here? Okay, so we are going to try to identify this bird that I saw this weekend in Rock Creek Park. It's a handsome robin-sized bird, and we're going to take you through the Merlin app to see how, if you see a bird like this, maybe take a photograph of it, wondering what it is, you can figure out what it is. So we're going to first click on the Start the Bird ID. First question it's going to ask is location. So what's great about this app is it's kind of taking you through the steps that you should be thinking about, and with that we're kind of be covering in the second part of this course next week. But these are some of the clues that you're going to use yourself as a beginning bird watcher to help figure out what a bird is. So you want to know where you saw the bird, because birds are very location specific. What season? It might not be the right season for a particular type of bird species. Bird sizes, that's going to help you identify and distinguish between different types of birds. And what it's doing, the bird activity, as well as its colors. So here, we're going to click on Washington, D.C. When did you see the bird? So we did not see it on October 7th. We're going to reset it to today. And here it gives you clues of different size birds that are kind of like landmarks or benchmarks for a bird size. So it's kind of like, is it bigger than a bread box? So we have a sparrow on the left, robin, crow, and a Canada goose on the right. So this was about robin size. We'll click on that. And the primary colors that you saw, they'll let you select up to 3. So we see a nice gray head here. Click that in there. Yellow breast. See a little bit of white, but we'll just skip that. Also, what is the bird doing? Is it at a feeder, swimming or wading on the ground? Let's see, it's in the tree or bush in this picture, so let's select that. And it's going to bring up a list of possible birds. And this is really cool. It's using all that information and figuring out what are the possible birds here. Let's take a look at the scarlet tanager. Even though that picture doesn't look like one, I know that a female has the same kind of colors there. So that's kind of close. It's got the yellow and the gray wing there, but it's not quite a good match. So let's check out this one at the top, the great crested flycatcher. Gotta love that name too. Oh, look at that. That's almost a perfect match to this photograph. So I'm saying that that's pretty good. The tail is the same shape, the head color distribution is very nice. So once you get there, you can find out more information here. You can even pull up the sound of it. You might have been hearing some of these in the forest if you've been walking through DC recently. That sounds familiar. That's a great crested flycatcher. So once you've established your bird, click yes, this is my bird. That'll provide feedback to the app to improve it in the future. You can also upload a photograph of the bird. This is more magic than the actual process, but let's just choose a photograph. Go down to my bird selection here. Find that bird. What you want to do is zoom until it fills in the box. Hit next. It's going to want to know the location because that's very important for ID and the date as well. And then presto, it brings up the great crested flycatcher. So that's the Merlin Bird app. Next, we have the eBird. eBird is the one that helps you keep track of the birds in your life list. So when you start the app, you want to make sure that your location services are indicated. It's going to help locate where you are, which is, as we've established, is important. And let's start right into it. So you'll take your phone out in the field. You have this app at hand. When you start looking for birds, it'll bring up a list of likely birds that have been seen in the area based on checklists recently in a 20 by 20 kilometer area around here. So what's great about this is you can just start inputting birds that you saw. Some of the favorite birds that have been listed are scarlet tanager. So let's just click on that. If I click on the plus button on the left, it'll just tag that. If I see two more, you can just click it again, and it keeps track of that. If you want to go and see a list of the birds that you're keeping track of, just go down here and click on that. Someone said that their favorite bird was a green jay. So let's see what happens if we try to bring that up. Since this is based on birds that we have seen in the area, and a green jay is really not seen anywhere except maybe Texas, it's not going to add it here. It's not a likely candidate. So you might have seen something else. If you do just click in jay, if you know you saw a blue jay, it's going to bring up the species that is most likely in the area. Let's try that with chickadee too. Chickadees, as you may know, there are different types of chickadees throughout the US, North America. In this area, you're most likely to see a Carolina chickadee. You might also see a black-capped chickadee. It's very hard for me to distinguish between the two, but the R on the right indicates that it would be a rarity in this area. So if you're unsure, the most likely and most safest bet is to bring up the Carolina chickadee. Here is another way to enter the number. You can just type in the number there. So once you're done with your observations, you just hit stop. I'll ask you if you want to stop tracking. The tracking part is interesting. That's using the GPS to indicate how far you've gone. So if you're walking through the woods, it'll actually record the effort that you made in terms of distance by inputting the distances you traveled as part of your observation. Here you're going to want to choose a location. You may have personal locations, like I have where I live is Flower Avenue. That's a personal location of mine. Or you can bring up a map of the locations and click on a hotspot. If you're in an area that is near a hotspot, if I was actually at a hotspot, I would probably select that just because it consolidates the data into one location. We'll just stick with the Flower Avenue for now. Number of observers, that's also an indication of the effort that you've done. And also you want to indicate whether it's a complete checklist, because the data depends on the seriousness of what your observations are, whether you're recording all the birds that you can identify, or you're just recording the ones that you're interested at this point. For good practice, record everything that you can identify. That's going to provide the best data for the database. Here you can select between three basic types of observations: traveling, stationary, which is being in one place, or incidental, which is if you're just walking down the street and you see, like for example, last night I heard a barred owl in the middle of the night. I wasn't looking for birds, but I heard it, I wanted to record it, so I recorded it as an incidental. So once you're ready, you just hit submit. You can provide additional checklist comments like the weather, or just a reminder yourself of where you went, and then go from there. We're gonna, since this is a fake checklist, we're just gonna move on here. So that's the eBird list, eBird app. And we're gonna check out some other resources that are online. Thank you. So online resources. So we're probably spending a lot of time in front of our computers these days for one reason or the other. So it's a great time to check out some of these online websites, go down some rabbit holes and check out all the information that's available on these. Audubon has a nice site, has all the US species, including the Sibley drawings. So the app doesn't have the drawings, but I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can click on this. So the app has, I mean, the website has the collection of all of David Sibley's drawings. I heard an Acadian flycatcher walking through the woods, so you can bring up that. The information that is provided is great. It's ways to help identify the bird, a beautiful picture, more pictures, range maps that are available in books as well, information about the behavior, eggs, nesting, etc. The call, you can hear the Cupid dog call of the Acadian flycatcher here. And this great range map here that shows the effects of climate change on the range of each species. So this is the range of the Acadian flycatcher now. If we go up by 1.5 degrees Celsius, it shows you the results of the impact on the population. So these red areas are where it's being diminished. The blue areas are where it's going. So it makes sense as the planet's getting warmer, the populations are moving north. So you can just go down so many rabbit holes on site. We have other websites that are great. Cornell Lab has similar information in theirs, plus they have ID skill tips as well as bird feeding advice, as well as their vast Macaulay library sound recording collection. Oops. On eBird, you can enhance the information that you've entered on the app and use it to explore different items. So I'm going to just quickly touch on ways to enhance your checklist and use the information on there to find hotspots. So you can go on site, use the crowdsourced information to explore hotspots. These are areas, public areas that lots of birders go to and where you'll have good luck finding a bird. So in Washington, D.C., you can just home in on that. Each of these pinpoints represents a hotspot. You can go in, take a look at what's available, what's been seen recently there. If you're tracking a certain type of bird, you can see if that has shown up recently. This allows you to check into other people's checklists and see what kind of information is there. This person saw an osprey down at Haynes Point, flying above the Potomac Channel. So it's a great resource to finding the birds around you. Moving on to social media, there's plenty of, there's just a panoply of things that you can explore online. Locally, the Maryland and DC Birding Google group is a great place to carry on conversations online, get help for bird identification, find out what people are seeing where. There are a number of Facebook groups. Here are a couple that help you with bird identification. You can go onto the site enter a picture of a bird that you're unsure of, and people will jump in and help you determine what that is. And one of my favorite things to do is just to go onto Instagram. It keeps me inspired when I'm locked inside in front of my computer during the day. I need a little shot of a bird, a beautiful bird picture. Here we have DC Audubon that's has just started their Instagram last year, showing what you can see around here right now with lots of useful information. So here's a beautiful Cape May warbler that was seen, I think, probably just this morning. And it's a great way to explore the birds that you know, as well as get excited about what you can see out there. So check out some of these sites, and you won't be sorry. Okay, I think the next speaker will be talking about when and where to look for birds. Is that you, Dana, or?
I guess it is. I forgot that it was me, but yes, when and where to look for birds. Starting to recognize the different types of habitat is really important. You know, whether it's what the birds are foraging on or eating, where they nest, thinking about edge habitats, which means going from like a forest to a meadow. So that edge area in a lot of different ecosystems is a place where there are lots of predators, and there's usually a little bit more transitional habitat structure. And so that is often a really good spot to look for things that are different, and for keystone predators and things like that. The time of day, the time of year, you know, it takes a while to learn when to expect different birds. One thing I really like about bird watching is going to different parks and natural areas throughout the year and starting to get a sense of the seasons. Getting up early is always advisable if you want to see birds, especially songbirds. As soon as they get up, they have to eat. They're very active. They're going from tree to tree, from the ground to grass, whatever it is that they're interested in. And so getting up early is advised, but that being said, you know, you won't see owls usually in the day unless they're just roosting. You can see them, but they won't be very active. And there are some other animals that are a little bit, or some other birds that are a little bit more active right before the sun sets. You know, obviously foul weather is not enjoyable to be out birding in. Some people I know do go out into the rain and bad weather to see certain birds if they happen to be there. Birds get stressed out when it's too hot out. They're less active. And I think there's a lot of external factors too, like if your binoculars are fogging up or wet, you're not going to get a very good look at the bird. Next slide. So some of the different habitats we have here, marshes, which are wetlands that are dominated by grasses, and swamps, which are wetlands that are dominated by trees. Just to clarify for everyone, we are technically in a coastal floodplain, not a swamp necessarily here, but around DC we do have lots of swamp habitats. One that I think about that has some swamp area is Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens. There is a great diversity of both wading birds, predators, migratory birds. It's a good place to see herons, both great blue heron and green heron, and egret sometimes. Indigo buntings are often seen there, and a lot of migratory warblers as well. Next slide. Rivers, reservoirs, and ponds. I'd say just if there's water, put your binoculars on it and scope it. I think we went backwards. Fletcher's Cove is a really great spot. I think it's closed right now. I haven't been there for a while, but the C&O Canal, by the towpath there's a parking area by the boat rental. A great place to explore. One thing I really like about it is there's some areas where there's lower canopy trees, and sometimes you can be a little bit closer to Baltimore orioles, black pole warblers, prothonotary warblers, but there's also all these really great water birds too. So my recommendation is, even if it's just a pond, like put your binoculars on it, you might find something really cool. Next slide. Here we go. The eastern deciduous forest, one of my favorite habitats, because a lot of the bird species, thrushes that I've studied, use the eastern deciduous forest. These areas are really great during migration. All of our high peaks, whether it's Rock Creek Park, Fort DuPont, Glover Archibald, they're all going to have a lot of different species of trees. Right now, everything's starting to be pretty leafed out, and you're going to see a variety of both resident and migratory birds if you go there during migration or in the summer when some of our migratory birds that breed here set up their nesting territories. Also lots of woodpeckers and the snags. There's a lot to look at in these habitats. Next. Grasslands. So grasslands are one of the most threatened habitats in this area. You may see lawns and things like that and think of it as a grassland, but we're really talking about things that have more characteristics and native plants. So one of the best areas to see grassland birds here is actually the Arboretum, which is unfortunately closed right now, but they've really done a good job at creating some prairie habitat there. And also by the Rock Creek Nature Center, there's a really nice managed meadow. I would highly recommend checking out these grassland habitats. So these are areas where there's a foot or two usually of native plants, and primarily dominated by grasses. This is where you find really cool sparrows, dark-eyed juncos, a lot of warblers that migrate through. There are certain ones that prefer meadow. And I think that right now the best one probably to go to would be at Rock Creek. Next slide. And just urban and residential areas. One thing you can do is try to attract birds to your property. Coming up, we actually have another webinar that's about landscaping for birds. But we have these amazing natural habitats here that are actually in really urban areas. One I think about a lot is the US Botanic Garden. They do a really good job of landscaping with native plants. So there's a lot of areas in DC that, you know, you may think of them as being a part of the urban matrix, but they actually have tall trees, which are important for birds, and a variety of beneficial landscaped environments. But in general, you know, if you're in a more hardened urban area where there aren't a lot of big trees, you're most likely to see house sparrows and bushes, starlings. They go up on rooftops and also forage in the grass sometimes. And maybe even a gray catbird, which is actually one of our migratory birds that have recently returned to the area. Next slide. Was I gonna do this one, or I could just keep going? Okay, Marissa, you're welcome.
We're nearing the end of the presentation. This is, again, know before you go. So one of the things we wanted to make sure to share with you all is birding ethics, which we're sharing from the American Birding Association Code of Ethics. It's important, of course, to recognize and know the rules for private property, not go birding in someone's yard unless they tell you it's okay, and also know the rules for public spaces as well. Do stay on trails, of course, so you don't disturb bird habitat. There are ground nesting birds and birds that spend time on the ground. So in general, stay on trails. Be sure to also leave no trace. This is your general outdoor best practices. Don't litter and don't mess things up. Some other things to be aware of that have more to do with bird biology are the fact that birds can hear really well and they can see really well. So if you're being loud, there's a good chance they'll hear you. Even if you're trying to be quiet, they might still hear you then too. But if you're trying to watch birds, it's better to keep quiet, keep voices down. Or if you have to make some noise, then to get quiet and wait and listen and look around to see what you can see. Again, birds can see bright colors. They can see colors very, very well. They can actually see more colors than we can see. But as far as clothing goes, if you have the option, it's better to choose more neutral tones or things that blend in with where you're going. I'll add a side note here. Definitely don't go out and buy a new wardrobe because you're into bird watching. No, you're probably fine with what you have. But if you're choosing between the magenta and the khaki, maybe go with the khaki or the forest green or something like that. But again, I have a bright purple raincoat and I will wear it when it's raining and the birds are fine with that. But again, just something to be aware of, that they do see this really well. Sometimes you'll see cats with a collar that's brightly colored. It's because birds see color really well. So it helps make the cat more visible to the birds. Anyway, when you're birding in a group, keep in mind, not blocking people. One thing that I've noticed as a good tip is if you're looking at your binoculars and there's sort of a near side of the trail and a far side of the trail, stand on the side that's closer to what you're looking for. And then people won't be walking in front of you or have to make the call of oh, am I gonna block your binocular view, or should I wait until you're done? But if you stand on the side that's closer to what you're looking at, it's easier for people to get around you without having to potentially disturb you. And a pro tip here, I don't know if this is necessarily an ethics tip or more of a public service announcement, but don't walk while looking through your binoculars. You can't see the ground at the same time. They're right there up in your face. So definitely stop, see the bird, then put your binoculars up, put them down and move on. And a particular note for the DC area is to be careful with optics around, be aware of your broader surroundings. If you are birding near some secure government facilities and you've got your fancy optics with you, people might not believe that you're actually looking at birds. So be aware. We've heard stories of people who realized they were bird watching staring at a school or something like that, which can definitely be taken the wrong way, and just be aware. All right, next slide. Finally, some notes on photography and also some technology that we can use. Again, because birds can see, using flash photography can stress them out, disturb them, interrupt their behavior. And don't get in the way of, don't let your pursuit of a good photograph get in the way of the welfare of the bird, by getting too close to them, especially if they're doing a sensitive activity like breeding or defending their territory or something like that. And then, as Giselle mentioned, our iPhone apps can play bird songs, and birds will often be, especially in the breeding season or the mating season, will use those songs to let other birds know where their territory is, to defend their territory, to attract mates, and they'll devote a lot of time and energy to singing and displaying or and listening to intruders who might be infringing on their nesting habitat or their breeding habitat or something like that. And so if you play the bird song back in the call, the bird might well respond. They might sing their song back to you. They might come out into the open, and it can be tempting to use that to see the bird, but it can be stressful. And we in general recommend using it. If you use it at all, do so sparingly and play it at a very low volume. If you're in a group, check with the others in the group to see how they feel about playback. And also keep in mind, if someone doesn't know that you're doing playback, they might well hear your song and think it's a real bird and then enter it into eBird and get really confused. So in general, usually don't. DC Audubon tends not to do this on our own field trips, but there is some context dependency here. For instance, if you're it's more of an issue if the bird is nesting, if it's threatened, endangered, or rare, or if it's a special concern in some way. So if you see a lot of times, well, a rare bird might show up and it's not used to DC's habitat, it might be under kind of stressful or unusual environmental conditions that it doesn't usually experience. And then if a bunch of bird watchers flock to wherever it has showed up and then start playing its call all day, and the bird spends a lot of time trying to respond to this call, that can even add more pressure to it. And birds can hear really, really, really well. I will say one time I pulled up a song for a water thrush. They look pretty similar. I wasn't quite sure which one it was. And I just for reference wanted to like play the song and put it on low volume and held it up to my ear, played one song and the bird didn't notice. And I was like, okay, great, it can't hear me. And then I tried the other, so there's like the northern water thrush and the Louisiana water thrush. I tried the Louisiana water thrush, lowest volume possible, and the bird heard it, jumped right out, started singing. And so, yeah, they hear really, really well. And yeah, be conscientious and use this sparingly, if at all. And I think that's all on birding ethics. I think we're ready now to just let you know a few things. Like for instance, I hope you'll join us next week for part 2, Into the Field, where we'll talk more about bird ID, bird songs, parts of a bird, and a lot of the basics that will help you actually sort of make those calls and learn about birds when you're seeing them out in the world. One other note that we mentioned, this came up in the chat too, and I just wanted to remind everyone that we're recording this. If you have any concerns about it being recorded and potentially shared online, please let DC Audubon know and let us know in the chat, either privately or you can email us at info@dcaudubonsociety.org. So thanks for joining, and I think we're ready to transition to the Q&A session. So feel free to unmute yourself, turn on your videos, and we'll answer your questions. Last thing, I'm sorry, I almost completely forgot about this. I am sharing a link to a feedback form, and I believe we will be able to email this to people as well. We'd really like to hear your thoughts on how to make this better. This is the first time offering this as an online course instead of a classroom session paired with a field trip.
So I'm seeing things in the chat, but no one seems like they have a question. Feel free to type it in the chat if you prefer that, or just unmute yourself. It can be any kind of question about what we covered. Next week we're going to be focusing a little bit more about how to prepare yourself for going into the field and how to communicate with other birders when you see a bird, and how to better ID birds and things like that.
And we do have a handout that we've used in the past. So I saw there was a question here coming in about, we have resources to share about books, etc. But we have a handbook that we've used in the in-person class in the past. We can share that with folks as well. Maybe we'll get it up on the DC Audubon website, and then we can share the link to resources that way. So that way you have the clickable links that go along with this class. And if you're looking for an idea for where to get started learning birds of DC, we also have a new section on our website under education that has some birds you can start learning. We call them the familiar 15, although we couldn't help ourselves and added in a few more, especially so we could accommodate the birds that are common in the summer versus the winter. So there's a list of species there that are really common. And we also have city slickers. So if you're primarily birding in an urban area, you can start learning the birds that are most commonly found there. So we pulled these from common birds based on eBird reports and also our own experience.
So someone was asking about rose-breasted grosbeak. I haven't really seen them around here. This is probably a bad way of doing this. Have you guys seen one recently? Where did you see it at?
So yeah, I just put this in the chat box. Just this past week, I saw them at Fort Totten and Bunker Hill Park, which is in Brookland, where I live. It's a wonderful 1 square block park that is just great for migrants. So I've seen them there just in the last week. Rock Creek would be a good place to go. Also, I mean, they're perching birds in wooded areas. So those would be where I would go.
Yeah, and I think someone sent the DC Audubon a recording that had a rose-breasted grosbeak in it, but I don't remember where they were. So if you guys ever have questions for social media about birds that you see or hear, it helps to say like what type of habitat you're in, like we were talking about, and where you were, because that will help us do the same thing that Hasal's app was doing, is kind of start limiting or removing things that we know it probably isn't.
We had a question come up about metro accessible birding spots, especially now with, some places are closed. What would be some recommendations? I'm trying to think what is open.
So what I always do is I just start with the closest park to my house and see what that's like. I mean, it's really amazing right now because it's migration, like all kinds of birds are moving around. What I like to do is look at Google Maps and put it on the satellite picture and just look for green and try to go there. Beyond that, I think this person was saying they were from U Street and Adams Morgan. That's not very far from me. I'd say, I mean, like if you're in Adams Morgan, maybe try to walk into Rock Creek Park. But if you're further down U Street 16th, Malcolm X Park is a really great spot. I mean, even some of the tiny community parks have really cool birds, like the park at LaDroit, which is really close to my house and is pretty urban. There were parulas that were in some of the trees before when I've been over there, which is a small migrant that does not stick around there, but you may find things that you're not expecting.
Another good place, where?
Lower Senate Park too, and Capitol grounds.
And then another good place I just discovered, I've lived in DC for 20 years. I didn't know this place existed until a year ago. Is Treegarin Conservancy, which is in Cleveland Park. Basically right just west of Connecticut Avenue, right by Washington International School. It's a wonderful, pretty good sized park. It's a little offshoot of Rock Creek. So you can get on the red line and get up there really quickly.
We had a question too about when we say early, how early are we talking for watching? And I mean, if you want to go night birding, you can go and when it's dark out. But in general, I look at the sunrise and sunset times because birds are most active at dawn, the sort of dawn chorus of birds singing that helps you see a lot of them. They're active, they're making noise. So we're giving you more clues on where they might be. And if you want to check, most smartphones will have, like in the built-in weather app, will list the sunrise and sunset times. So I don't always get up this early, even when I'm trying to be early, but like that'll let you know when the most active time for the birds is. And I found that from like 6:30 onward till about 8, it's pretty active in Rock Creek Park right now, for example. And then again, you get a spike in activity sort of towards sunset.
I would just add that depending on the type of birding that you're doing or the type of birds you're looking for, there can be a bit of variability there. Like, for example, if maybe shorebirds, or specifically if you're looking for some birds of prey or raptors in a grassland habitat, the being out there super early may not be as important, but there are a lot of factors to consider, like time of year as well.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and ducks are usually around all day. A lot of the water birds, beyond just the shorebirds.
Yeah, the getting out early is particularly a thing for migration and breeding season. And then in the winter, it doesn't tend to matter so much. Like if you look at the field trip times for DC Audubon's in-person events, we start at 8, which is about as early as we feel we can ask, you know, the general DC populace to go birding. But in the winter, you know, it doesn't matter so much. We might get started at 9, 10, 1 p.m. Is that you don't see that same spike in activity. And a lot of birds they're following when, like, if it gets hot and insects aren't as active, a lot of the insect eating birds will slow down. In the winter, birds that are foraging on things like that, it takes time for the sun to warm things up and for insects and other food items to become active. So the early morning isn't quite as active then.
And this time of year, if you come across a day that is cooler, cloudier, you might have better luck throughout the day than on a hot, sunny day.
Yeah, there's also sometimes a mid-morning peak, at least with wood thrush. They had typically around 10:30, 11, just a time when they would get active again. And I think other birds are like this too. The first thing they do when they get up is sing, let you know if it's their territory, eat, you know, especially now these are migration notes, but and then they kind of, you know, do other things, maybe sitting on their nest or building a nest or, you know, fighting with a neighbor rival for their territory. And then there's sometimes also a mid-morning peak.
And thanks to those of you for sharing your bird sightings and observations in the chat. It's really cool to see that, like a blue jay fighting with a crow. I've seen that before in my neighborhood. I've also seen mockingbirds chasing jays or chasing crows or hawks. Yeah, it's great to hear what you're all seeing nearby. And baby hawks, that's awesome.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people that have definitely spent some time looking at birds. It seems like from these comments, people have favorite birds, or, you know, sometimes we teach this class and people are like, oh, I've seen one bird before that I could identify, or they maybe can identify no birds. So I'm actually really impressed by some of the comments here.
Yeah, a lot of good favorite birds here.
So it seems like some people are dropping off. I guess we'll do one more call for last burning questions. If not, you can think about your questions. And if you want to join us next week for part 2, where we're going to get into a little bit deeper dive into going out and being in the field bird watching. So there's a question about an injured bird. I think what I would do is I would try to get in contact with City Wildlife. It's a local DC rehab area. Some people perceive birds to be injured that aren't actually injured. And some birds pretend that they're injured to distract you from their nest. So it might depend on, you know, if the bird is actually injured or not, versus like a fledgling bird that maybe just hopped out of the nest. But City Wildlife is a great resource, and you can Google them, and they have a lot of people that rehab injured birds. And Marissa put the link in the chat.
And I think they might be closed this right now because of COVID-19. Last time I checked with them, they did, I think they refer to like the DC Animal Rescue or something. Just check the website. You can still call them, and if it's something like a window strike, they might be able to talk you through how to treat the bird in that case.
Yeah, DC Animal Control is actually very good. That I came across an injured bird a few years ago, and I called City Wildlife, and they referred me to Animal Control, and they were wonderful. Like, I was worried that, you know, DC Animal Control, they're never going to show up. They're not going to know what they're doing. I mean, they were excellent. So, yeah, if you can't get a hold of City Wildlife, or they may even say, called DC Animal Control, and they've been a very good, reliable resource for injured birds.
Yeah, and I think, you know, just be careful too, you know, like if it was an injured raptor or something like that, they can harm you with their talons. So just be careful about decisions when you're interacting with wildlife. I always err on the side of caution. You know, I'm a professional wildlife biologist, so I have some training on what to do. But, you know, like these are wild animals, and, you know, you just have to use caution. I see that Marissa also put the info on what to do if you find a baby bird, which is one of our top questions at DC Audubon and probably in a lot of areas right now when birds are starting to fledge, or, you know, if they get knocked out of the nest.
Ready to sign off. Thanks everyone for sticking with us to 9 p.m.
Yay. We look forward to talking to you more next week, and have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bring your good sightings next week.
Thank you.